Hi there, my name is Lo. Welcome to my channel where I discuss everything between Hermes and grocery bags. Today filming in a bit of a different setting, also putting out this video at a time of week that you're not used to, at least if you're following me at all. But I wanted to discuss this now, just in time to get on the bandwagon, so to say, of this Balenciaga controversy that's been going on, so call me opportunistic, but I really did want to touch upon this before the dust settles, because honestly I wouldn't be surprised at all if the dust settles around this issue and everybody just keeps on going as they usually do, because this is what we are finding with so many other scandals around luxury houses, and it's also what this video is going to be about. So tonight I have my laptop here just so hopefully I don't lose my line of thought all too much, steaming cup of tea and a little bit of light to keep me company. Before we get started, let's do a little super dake up kind of disclaimer. So what I'm going to say is for entertainment purposes only. It's not per se rooted in fact, it's just my opinion. Tonight it's also about asking a lot of questions, honestly, and everything I'm saying here is alleged. So let's just back up for a little bit. I think it's unlikely that you missed it if you're into luxury fashion or even if you clicked on this video, but think it was this week, pretty sure it was this week, Balenciaga put out a campaign where, well, to understate it, children were placed in adult situations, and it was a campaign that also had a number of very shady references. So it is distasteful to say the least. And I could tell you that I disapprove, and obviously I do, and I have a Balenciaga bag, and I'm going to put out a video in a few weeks indicated my interest in another Balenciaga bag. I've already shot that and removed all of these source files, which was not very handy of me in hindsight, but I'll put a disclaimer in that video because honestly I'm not sure how to feel right now. I was never interested in Balenciaga for their provocative nature. I was just interested in a couple of their bags which were low-key and interestingly shaped, but as you can imagine, wearing my Balenciaga bag right now or buying additional pieces from them is not something that's top of mind for me right now. But furthermore, when these things happen, and I have this more often, like I will see something that is very personal and very specific, and it comes down to me asking myself things like, why does anybody do anything? So this particular Balenciaga campaign triggered me to think about why these scandals happen in the first place and how do we respond to them as consumers. And I'm in that sense also curious to hear what your thoughts are on this topic on a more general level, so beyond just this Balenciaga scandal. So I did a bit of research, or well, I googled around a little bit, and there have been a lot of scandals. And honestly, I might be going back quite some time. I don't really have the timelines for everything that I'm going to mention. So the scandals that I came across, I kind of try to put them in 3 categories. I really enjoy categorizing things, although I really don't enjoy categorizing people. But anyway, looking at these sort of scandals, I came up with sort of 3 umbrellas for them. My first umbrella was poor choices in media outlets, such as campaigns and commercials, but also on runways. This Balenciaga controversy, I mean, it was a campaign, so it obviously fits into this category. But these things happen all the time, right? So also more recently, Guess put out a collection that had a lot of work from Banksy on it. So obviously they wanted to sell that and make some financial gain from it, and Banksy was not having it. So he called out to his followers, I think on Instagram or Twitter, to go and rob the Guess store, because if they were not paying him for his work, then consumers shouldn't be paying Guess for the products that they put out there. I think we see this happen more often where there's issues with plagiarism or brands stealing ideas and calling them their own. Perhaps in that sense this is somewhat less sensitive because it's not really a matter of bigotry. It's more, if you can say it like that, a matter of theft, which is also not good, obviously. Moving on to some examples from the runway, where Gucci has not been doing an amazing job. At some point in time they decided to send out a model on the runway with a sort of glittered blackface, which they said was meant to be interpreted as a veil, but I can imagine that people took this the wrong way. Gucci also managed at some point to send out a model on the runway in a straitjacket, which was then also considered offensive because mental health issues obviously are not fashion. Some time ago we also had this H&M scandal, H&M obviously not a luxury brand, but a very well-known one. I think everybody can remember the picture of the African-American boy who was wearing a sweater that said "coolest monkey in the jungle." Boys in the same sweater but with a different text on it were all white. And a lot of these are situations where you wonder, like, why do these things happen? Like, there's so many people involved in putting out these campaigns. Why is there nobody who said, I don't think that this is really a great idea? Somebody might take offense to this. It's really unclear to me why these things happen. I also read that the mother of the boy in the sweater from H&M said that she felt that there was nothing wrong with the way her son was portrayed. It might not have been a very purposeful act, but then again, there's so many people involved that you wonder, how do these things sort of sliver through the cracks? You almost start to think that they are on purpose, and perhaps to some extent they are indeed on purpose, because hey, all publicity is good publicity, right? Just to round off with a little example from the Netherlands, you might have noticed that the World Championship of Soccer is going in Qatar, and a Dutch supermarket, they decided to put out a video of a bunch of construction workers partying. So they were walking or dancing in a polonaise. It's kind of like a conga dance, but then without sticking out your limbs and shouting hey. Anyway, these people were partying, and it was considered very insensitive because so many construction workers, mostly immigrants in Qatar, have suffered and died to build these stadiums, that we in the Netherlands were wondering, why out of all professions that you could choose from, did you have to go forward and choose a bunch of construction workers celebrating the World Championship? It was a very, very poor choice, and obviously the supermarket apologized. So my second category is misplaced product design or naming. Again, Balenciaga comes up here. I think everybody knows by now that Balenciaga is always pushing it in terms of their designs. So usually they will just come up with ridiculous things like bags in the shape of potato chip bags, or this trash bag. There was this ripoff of an IKEA bag which cost hundreds of euros. So Balenciaga is pretty well known for putting out just ridiculous stuff for us to buy. One thing that actually did give them a bit more controversy was this very destroyed type of shoe, of which people were actually saying that they were making fun of homelessness, and homelessness obviously is not fashion. Then a couple of examples from the runway. So going back to Gucci blackfacing, not only did they put out a blackface on the runway, they produced a sweater with kind of like a turtleneck that you could pull over your face, and then there would be an opening around the mouth, which was already pretty weird, but because they also sort of made very thick red lips around the opening, it really gave this imagery of blackfacing. And again, not knowing if they're doing this on purpose, but at least a very, very, very poor design choice. Then at some point, Burberry out of all brands, they came up with this hoodie, and the ropes that were coming out of the hoodie they had tied up in something that looked like a noose. They claimed that it was unfortunate that the knot that they tied in the ropes of the hoodie was based on a nautical theme that they had throughout their collection, but they decided to discontinue the hoodie after that. Then there was Dolce & Gabbana, and we'll get back to Dolce & Gabbana in a little bit because I have more to say about them. Anyway, Dolce & Gabbana at some point in time put out this sandal, which was already kind of on the edge perhaps, but they might have gotten away with it, only they decided to literally call it the slave sandal. Not a great idea, but as we will see, Dolce & Gabbana don't really care that much about anything. Wrapping up, the last example that I wanted to mention was Kim Kardashian, who initially wanted to call her shapewear brand Kimono, which a lot of Japanese people, not surprisingly, found very offensive because they didn't want their traditional wear to be associated with underwear. This brand later on turned out to become Skims. Then the third category, which I've called PR must be doing overtime because you are in charge. This is really when it comes to people at brands who are in power doing things that are highly inappropriate. So prime example here are definitely Dolce & Gabbana. Just to point out a number of things, they've called Selena Gomez fat. They've ended up in a fight with the Chinese so bad that China, like the whole of China, actually boycotts Dolce & Gabbana, if I've understood correctly. This was also over a racist commercial that they made of a Asian lady struggling with chopsticks to eat Italian food. It was very insensitive, and then when the Chinese said something about it, Dolce & Gabbana kind of went on a rampage on Instagram, said that their account was hacked, nobody believed them, and it never really worked out, which is unfortunate because it definitely could have been a very big market for them. And Dolce & Gabbana are also known for having very, well, let's say traditional traditional family values. They believe that gay men shouldn't adopt and that children should only be born out of families with a wife and a husband, which was obviously offensive to a lot of people, one of them being Elton John. And then Dolce & Gabbana ended up in a feud with Elton John. I mean, who ends up in a feud with Elton John? Anyway, I think these guys by now are kind of proud of being boycotted and cancelled by a number of groups in society. And yeah, as they are Dolce & Gabbana, it's very unlikely that Dolce & Gabbana will get rid of Dolce & Gabbana. So somewhat different happened with the next two creative directors I'm going to mention. So first of all, you have John Galliano, who was the creative director of Dior. This guy was filmed expressing very racist and anti-Semitic thoughts. I think he was even prosecuted by the French government over it, and not surprisingly, Dior decided to drop him. And then there's Alexander Wang, who has his own brand, but he was also the creative director of Balenciaga, and for him there were some alleged sexual misconduct charges. So I don't think he's ever been prosecuted, or nobody perhaps even filed charges against him officially, but it was enough for him to step down from Balenciaga so that another creative director could take over and continue the controversy. I just gave you a bunch of examples, mostly to show to you that scandals are pretty much from all times and they're all around, and they have different types of outlets and they have different types of insensitivities. But I was thinking about what is causing all this, and I have a number of hypotheses here, so hear me out. I was wondering whether, especially more recently, because we as people have to put our attention into so many things that are basically screaming for our attention all day long, that we are basically raising the ceiling for brands to get our awareness. And Balenciaga is probably one of the brands that's been pushing these boundaries with ridiculous products and honestly very loud people, at least, to promote those products. So I feel Balenciaga has been pushing these boundaries perhaps more than any other brand. So are we also not directly or indirectly asking these brands to shock us? I would definitely say Balenciaga's absolutely taken a wrong turn with their most recent campaigns, but if you think about the products that they would put out there, for example, that are perhaps also like extremely ridiculous, impractical, basically just collector's items, I think we may ask ourselves, is that not also what we as consumers are asking from a brand of Balenciaga? On the other hand, they might be raising the ceiling, but to some extent I also think that we are lowering the floor. So I do feel there's more sensitivity around a lot of these topics that are causing scandals nowadays. And it's not strange that we will often talk about cancel culture, for example. While a decade, or I think perhaps even 5 years ago, this was really not something that we would challenge. Like, we wouldn't cancel people and we wouldn't cancel or boycott brands over what was being said. And that we've become more sensitive is also not necessarily a bad thing. I think we're also very much just getting more aware, and we're getting more aware of marginalized groups in society and the position that they have, which is why we're probably more likely to stand up against racism, against homophobia, than we would have done a decade or 2 decades ago. I think we're starting to challenge more and more that we shouldn't be doing things just because we've always done them that way, which I generally believe is a good thing. Then I was also wondering if perhaps it is a cultural thing, and I'm not really sure in which direction this causation goes, so to say. So perhaps just most fashion houses are in Europe, and because of that, European fashion houses are more likely to end up in scandals. But I am wondering if Europeans are perhaps also less sensitive or less aware of a number of these things. And Europe is very big and Europe is very diverse, so I definitely don't want to say that the whole of Europe is like whatever. But I live in a country where blackfacing to some extent is still a very normal type of thing once a year for a particular children's celebration. I don't really know what that says about a country like mine, but I do feel to some extent that the roots that we have are very much embedded into the traditions that we have, and that changing a number of things for the better can sometimes really rub against the identity that we have. And then the last thought I was having is that perhaps fashion houses are just, or the people who work at fashion houses are just a bit unworldly and thus insensitive. I can understand that working in this type of luxury fashion might be very different from working anywhere else, and it is very exclusive. I've also worked with luxury brands for the past couple of years, and not that I'm in the luxury industry or anything, but these brands always give off some sort of vibe of exclusivity and an expectation of everybody doing things their way, everybody going that extra mile also to do things their way. And it's been very different in that sense than just collaborating with other brands or other businesses. So then it basically ends up being a question of what are you willing to let blow over? What are you willing to ignore? What are you willing to forgive? Because I think apart from Dolce & Gabbana, who honestly have really made a mess so many times over decades and not apologizing, I think nobody else has really been cancelled. Like Dolce & Gabbana is the only brand that I hear influencers pretty structurally say about, I'm not buying anything from them. So the question really is, will Balenciaga be cancelled? Will you start boycotting them? And if you will, then why? Is it because of the type of mishap that it was? Like, is it easier to say goodbye to a controversial creative director because brands can really distance them from this person and basically move on with a clean slate? Or in the case of Dolce & Gabbana, obviously they can't because they cannot get rid of Dolce & Gabbana. Or is it that you are more sensitive to particular topics that are being touched upon than others? Does the thing with Balenciaga strike a different type of nerve? If it's plagiarism or theft of intellectual property, for example. And is an apology a way out for brands? Or is a credible apology a way out? Because we are often finding that these brands are apologizing for what they did. If they produce merchandise that is considered offensive, they will take that off the racks. So can brands also redeem themselves? In the case of Balenciaga, I think they're basically blaming the people or the agency who supposedly came up and photographed the campaign. I think everybody finds it very hard to believe that that is what happened, or that that is the only thing that happened, that nobody at Balenciaga sort of gave an approval for what went out there. But okay, we don't have the full intel yet. So if Balenciaga manages to come up with a credible apology and a credible excuse, would that be a way to put this behind us? And then perhaps the last question, is Balenciaga too big to fail? Are they too established? Are there too many people that either support Balenciaga, love Balenciaga, or at least enjoy the things that Balenciaga puts out there, that they're just not going to be cancelled? Also, of course, Balenciaga, like many other luxury brands, they're part of corporations like LVMH, Richemont, or Kering in this case. If we would cancel Balenciaga, do we also have to cancel other brands in this corporation like Bottega Veneta, Gucci, Alexander McQueen, and Yves Saint Laurent? Or does that go too far? Would you have to suffer too much if you don't only have to drop your Balenciaga bag, but also all of your Bottega and Gucci and Saint Laurent bags, for example? So yeah, this is just sort of a blob of thoughts that I have on the topic, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. So feel free to drop them down below in the comments. Have you ever decided to boycott brands that you enjoyed? And if so, why? Are you planning to boycott Balenciaga? And how about companies from the same corporation? And what would a boycott actually mean to you? Is a boycott for you that you're definitely going to say no on a brand that already was not very appealing to you? Is boycotting going to break your heart because you're so distraught and disappointed while you love this brand so much? This video is really not meant to judge anybody's opinions or judge anybody's way of going about this, but it really triggered me in terms of when do we actually boycott and why do we boycott? Because in practice I don't really see it happen all that much, or you only see it happen very locally, for example. So for now I would say it's a bit inappropriate to close off with my regular there's a styling in a situation and a taste for everything, but I do want to wish you a good night, at least from my stance, a lot of wisdom, and I hope to see you back again in my next video. So for now, as we would say in Dutch, doei!